Well, I'm not going to smoke you. This video is going to be full of smoke, and it's going to leave you feeling smoking. Welcome back to our final video in this series of the topic of respiration. Now, in the previous videos, we've looked at the respiratory system. We saw the trachea, the bronchioles, the alveoli, the lungs, and we've seen how it all works, and we've seen what it looks like when it works properly. In this final video, we're going to look at what happens when we do damage and harm to our respiratory system. And the one surefire way to damage and mess up your respiratory system is through smoking. Just looking at this cigarette box here, you can see that cigarettes cause fatal lung disease. And that's what we'll be looking at more deeply in this video. The big question is, how does smoking affect the function of the respiratory system? So we all probably know that smoke is harmful, right? You've probably been told this since, the day you were born, that smoking is bad for you. But what exactly does smoke contain which makes it so harmful? What chemicals are found in there? Now, each of these pictures here relates to a chemical that is found in smoke, which is harmful for the body. So I would like to pause for a while and just think what each of these pictures represent. So the first picture here is very obvious. There is this chemical in smoke called nicotine. The second picture here shows some really thick, black looking things. This is tar. And this here, the exhaust coming out of your car, represents carbon monoxide. So we have nicotine, carbon monoxide, we have tar, and lastly we have irritants, which are substances which cause irritation to the respiratory system. So these are the four main components of smoke which do damage to your respiratory system. So this part of the topic can be a bit content heavy, quite a number of facts to remember. I think it would be more helpful for you to just open up your textbook to this page, 214, and just look at each component of tobacco smoke and try to understand the effect that each of them has on the respiratory system. So have a read of that first, and I'll just do a quick summary of it after that. Alright, so I hope that you've had a read through your textbook and also started filling up your notes. Let's start our quick summary. So nicotine is the component of tobacco which is responsible for addiction. It is the addictive component of tobacco smoke. And that is why if you look around and you ask people who are trying to quit smoking, they eat something called nicotine chewing gum. Right? So this is gum which they can chew on, which contains nicotine, so it kind of meets their need for that kick, that high, so that they don't have to keep smoking to get it. So it helps them to quit smoking. Nicotine, turns out, releases adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone, right, which causes a higher heart rate and higher blood pressure. Okay, but it is this adrenaline which also causes the person to feel a sense of high, and that's why nicotine also results in that addiction to smoking. And furthermore, nicotine also makes blood clot more easily, and this creates problems in smokers. Well, if you recall your heart lectures, okay, there was this thing called coronary heart disease, right, where the coronary arteries have a more narrow lumen. Now, if your blood clots more easily, it results in a higher risk of blood clots getting trapped in arteries, in the coronary arteries, which results in a higher risk of heart attack. So people who smoke, people who take in nicotine, will have a higher risk of heart attack. Next, we have carbon monoxide, yet another terrible chemical found in tobacco smoke. So what does it do? Well, first, it leads to an increased rate of fatty deposits in your arteries. If you remember from our last topic, we learned this term, atherosclerosis. It means the deposit of fatty deposits or plaque in the inner wall of your arteries. So carbon monoxide leads to more of this. So it leads to the narrowing of the lumen of your arteries, And if this happens in your coronary arteries, it leads to a higher risk of coronary heart disease and eventually heart attack. So smokers, beware. Now, secondly, carbon monoxide is a very famous chemical. You might have watched it in dramas before where people, lock themselves in a car with the engine on, and after a while, they die, right? And people say that's due to carbon monoxide poisoning. Right? So what exactly does carbon monoxide do? Well, it actually combines with hemoglobin and prevents hemoglobin from combining with oxygen. So imagine your red blood cell, right? This is your red blood cell, and inside your red blood cell there is hemoglobin, right? And normally hemoglobin binds to oxygen. However, carbon monoxide, if present in your body, competes with oxygen and also tries to bind with hemoglobin. So if carbon monoxide manages to bind to hemoglobin, then your red blood cells can no longer bind to oxygen and transport it. So carbon monoxide leads to less ability of your blood to transport oxygen. And eventually, if you are not able to transport oxygen to your tissue cells, you will die. So that's the bad effect of carbon monoxide. It combines with hemoglobin and prevents you from transporting oxygen as efficiently. Next, we have tar. Tar is that black gooey substance, and if it accumulates in your lungs, it just totally messes. Why would you want your lung to look like this? So this is a healthy lung, this is a tar-filled lung. So tar is just, firstly, it's ugly. Right? Secondly, what other effects does it have? Right? It is carcinogenic. This word carcinogenic means cancer causing. Right? It promotes cancer. It causes uncontrolled cell division. So cells which normally divide in a very controlled manner start to divide uncontrollably, which is what results in cancer. So that's what tar does, and it results in a higher risk of lung cancer in particular. Well, secondly, tar paralyzes the cilia in your air passages. You remember the cilia, right? Inside your trachea, for example, you had ciliated cells. Let me draw some ciliated cells for you. And they had cilia, right? These cilia helps to sweep up mucus and trapped particles. So what tar does is that it paralyzes these cilia, it's paralyzed, and they can no longer perform their function. So when your cilia are paralyzed, the dust particles trapped in mucus cannot be removed, they cannot be swept upwards. And this results in chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Well, just hold this in your thoughts for a while. We're going to come to this soon. So when mucus cannot be swept up, it results in chronic bronchitis and eventually emphysema. Finally, we have irritants. Now, irritants have a harmful effect on your system as well, and the harmful effect is similar to tar. So it also paralyzes your cilia in the air passages, and so that the dust trapped in the mucus cannot be removed, it will not be swept upwards. And this results in chronic bronchitis and emphysema. So what is chronic bronchitis? Well, this is a close-up of the air passageways. This is actually a bronchiole. Hopefully you can recognize this as a bronchiole. And you can zoom in and see that the cilia have been damaged and paralyzed. So mucus actually builds up. Mucus which traps dust builds up. It cannot be swept out. So it builds up in your passageways and eventually leads to your airways becoming irritated and swollen and inflamed. So your airways become narrowed and you find it difficult to breathe. That is what chronic bronchitis is. So again, here it is. Here's a healthy airway. So this might be your bronchiole, okay, or sometimes even your trachea. So what happens is that the lining, the epithelium, right, of the airways becomes inflamed, right? It becomes swollen, right? It becomes swollen because the cilia get damaged and the mucus cannot be removed. So excess mucus is produced, which cannot be removed, cannot be swept up. Dust and mucus are not removed, so it remains in your airways. And the swelling and the mucus and the dust all together results in your air passages being blocked so that you find it difficult to breathe. And there's a lot of coughing along with it as well. because you cannot breathe properly. So here's what it looks like when the air passageways become inflamed and have excess mucus. Now, over time, if you do not treat chronic bronchitis, so if you have chronic bronchitis and you don't treat it, it could develop into emphysema. Now, what happens? So in chronic bronchitis, you find it difficult to breathe and you start to cough, right? So persistent coughing due to bronchitis results in the walls between alveoli breaking down. So normally alveoli, you can see that these very nice walls between them, partition walls. However, when you keep coughing and coughing and coughing, the partition walls start to break down and the whole alveoli the whole cluster of alveoli start to collapse. So this results in decreased surface area for gaseous exchange. Look, here it's very nice and inflated with air. Here they collapse into like a deflated balloon. So there's decreased surface area for gaseous exchange. Right, and the lungs also lose their elasticity, right, and they start to inflate with air, right, and you cannot breathe, and breathing becomes even more difficult, right, and gaseous exchange becomes more difficult because there's decreased surface area. So this is emphysema. Emphysema basically is when your alveoli become damaged, right? Now to end off, there is a term to describe what we have seen. So there was chronic bronchitis, which was the swelling of your airways leading to coughing and breathing difficulties, and emphysema, which was the alveoli being damaged. Okay, so let me just make it clear. Alveoli damaged. Chronic bronchitis is your airways inflamed with excess mucus, right, and then coughing. So altogether, if you have both chronic bronchitis and you don't treat it and then you get emphysema, altogether it is called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or chronic obstructive lung disease, COPD or COLD. Okay, so emphysema and chronic bronchitis together, we have a term for it called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Now when we come back to class, we're going to watch a video of what it looks like for a person who lives with such a disease. Hopefully you can develop some empathy for them and recognize how we should tell people not to smoke because it could lead to that sort of problem. Alright, so that's all for this chapter really. This part of the topic is quite simple. You just need to know the different components, the 4 components of tobacco smoke, their harmful effects, and also these 2 terms, chronic bronchitis and emphysema, and together they are known as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Okay, I'll see you back in class.